What is up, everybody, and welcome to my long-awaited The Walking Dead season ranking. To give you a little bit of background on me with The Walking Dead, I was a fan from day one, actually earlier than day one, because I had one of those less than legal copies of the first episode. So a couple of weeks before day one, I was a massive fan of this show, watched it religiously up until the end of season 7. And then I swore off this show, absolutely hated the directions that it was taking, absolutely hated the direction it had been going for a while. And until about 3 weeks ago, I had never watched another episode of this show. And then finally decided, you know what, since the show is ending, since so many people in so many comment sections and so many live streams whenever The Walking Dead got brought up would tell me, hey man, after season 8, I promise it gets so much better. It gets almost back to the glory days. Some people even said it gets all the way back to the glory days of the earlier seasons. So I knuckled down and I binged through season 8, season 9, season 10, and completing last night at 1 in the morning, season 11, the final season. And so while it kind of seems ridiculous to talk about this show in any form of finality, which I'll give a little bit more context to later, we have 11 seasons of what will be dubbed The Walking Dead. And so I'm going to rank all of these seasons from worst to best. You guys know what we're doing. So as I give my own personal list, please let me know your ranking of all 11 of these seasons down below. Don't be an asshole to each other, otherwise Lucille's coming for you. And speaking of Lucille, number 11, the worst season of this show by quite a bit for me is season 7, the season that actually made me stop watching this show. Now, I'll give more details about my thoughts on season 6 when we get there, but the finale of season 6, the showrunners deciding to make the fate of those characters a cliffhanger to blackmail you to come back in a few months and watch season 7, absolutely threw me into a rage, and I almost stopped watching the show at that point. But I came back for the premiere of season 7 to finally get that answer of who met the bloody end of Lucille. And I gotta be honest with you, the first episode of season 7 I thought was fantastic. I thought it was a little annoying the way that they kind of teased you with the details of who got killed and they stretched it till the end of the episode, but when you finally got the answer, I thought it was some of the most insane and intense stuff on television that I'd ever seen. I thought that the way that they kind of played with audience expectations, both from the TV show fans as well as the comic book fans, by kind of swapping out who got killed while also killing who got killed in the comics, was really creative. The entrance of Negan, the way that he not only killed the two characters, but then following it up by completely demasculating Rick right in front of his entire group. I thought it was a fantastic opening to the season, and I was like, holy shit, I'm back, baby. I'm sorry, we had a little bit of problem over the summer, but you know what? I'm back. And then what followed was the biggest chunk of boring, uninteresting filler that this show ever gave us. The rest of that entire fucking season just felt like it was meandering. It was just discussing, hey, we're gonna need to go and become friends with all these other communities, and you'd get all of these little filler episodes that would go off and focus on one individual character that we didn't give a shit about. And so all season long, all 15 episodes after that premiere, week after week, I sat there going, can we please get fucking going? And even years after completing season 7, I can still tell you confidently it's one of the worst seasons of television I've ever seen in my life. So season 7, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, it's you, bitch. Coming in at number 10, not too much higher than number 11, is going to be season 8. And this is the season that I didn't even bother with. And after hearing the reviews of how the ratings had dipped like 5 times lower than normal, all the fans just abandoning the show left and right. I mean, social media was a frenzy during this season of everybody just dropping like flies. So I never really had the motivation to go back and watch it. So when I finally binged it about 3 or 4 weeks ago, it didn't really have a whole lot there for me. It had a little bit more going on than season 7. There was a few more standout moments, a few more interesting character things going on, but it's just the second half of all the problems we had in season 7. There is no reason why the all-out war storyline should have been stretched out to 2 seasons. You could have taken the best of season 7 and season 8 and actually had a pretty kick-ass little season there, and even could have enhanced some of the more interesting aspects of that storyline. But because The Walking Dead does what The Walking Dead does and draws things out and stretches things out and tries to go for more and more seasons when they really shouldn't have, a thing that I'm going to continue to talk about throughout some of this ranking, they absolutely botched the All Out War storyline in season 7 and again in season 8. Now there's a decent little gap between my bottom 2 and the next 2 that I'm going to talk about, but still not seasons of television that I would ever really consider rewatching. And coming in at number 9, unfortunately, is going to be season 10, the second half of the Whisperer storyline. And just like with the All Out War storyline, just like with the Governor and the Woodbury storyline, deciding to stretch out something for 2 whole seasons that never needed to be that fucking long, completely botched the amount of story that we had to have. I mean, The Walking Dead, ever since season 3, has always struggled to have 16 episodes worth of story. There's like one season I can talk about higher up on this list that felt like it filled out that runtime pretty well, but every other season since season 3, I've always felt like was padded out with filler and never needed to be as long as it was. And once they started doing that even more with having 2 seasons worth of one storyline, it's just never worked out good for the storylines that they're telling. And the Whisperer storyline is incredible. It is so crazy, it's wild, it's dark, it's fucked up. And the way that they introduce a lot of that in season 9, which I have yet to talk about, was really well done, just to draw it out painfully in season 10. Now there's good moments here, there's good character stuff, especially with Negan. There's some really good moments as far as like having you on the edge of your seat, not knowing what's going to happen, like whenever Beta is taking the entire horde to our main characters, and even just how Beta is reacting to what's been going on with Alpha and with Negan. All that stuff is great. But then you get to this natural conclusion of the season in episode 16. And for whatever fucking reason, they decide to pad out this season with another 6 episodes, of which 1 is worth watching, the Negan episode. And that episode, genuinely, I think is one of the best episodes of the series. The other 5, they're just filler. They're the COVID bonus episodes, and there's nothing bonus about it. Bonus gives the impression that you're getting something for value, you're getting something awesome, like that you otherwise wouldn't have had. It just pads it out and gives them more reasons to keep you watching. And my God, once you got to that natural conclusion in episode 16, which still felt drawn out by that point and teased where things were going to be going with the Commonwealth, and then you had 6 more episodes of just fucking around, like in between storylines between season 10 and 11, that was rough to get through. I really enjoyed seeing Carol be vengeful. You know, we got to see her lose her kid twice, and this was the time where she was just kind of lashing out at the world about it. The way that she worked with Negan, like I already said, Negan, his whole storyline here about escaping and coming in with the Whisperers just to be a double agent, all that stuff was great. But everything else in this season just never held my interest. Coming in at number 8 is season 11, also known as the final season of The Walking Dead, and the only season of The Walking Dead to be 24 fucking episodes. When I decided to binge through these last 4 seasons and power through it in order to give you guys this long-awaited, long-requested ranking video, I was already kind of like exhausted mentally when I thought all these seasons were going to be 16 episodes. And then I found out that there was 6 bonus episodes of season 10 and then 8 bonus episodes in season 11. Oh man, you guys better make this thing a view monster, that's all I can tell you. So what does season 11 do well? Well, you finally have kind of a rebuilding of the old world. You have the characters of the Commonwealth introduced, which is this society that has managed to function and sustain itself within The Walking Dead. They were able to have technology, they've been able to have government and politics and infrastructure, and is the only community that we have come across in this show, with the exceptions of aspects of early Alexandria, that actually felt like life and society is rebuilding. But of course, whenever you try to model something after the old world, you get all of the fucked up issues of the old world, like greed and self-interest and betrayal. And so essentially this entire season is about some of our main characters buying into the idea of the Commonwealth and integrating themselves into this society, and some of them becoming part of the military, other ones taking just regular old jobs, and one by one slowly starting to discover that things are not as they seem. And as the season progresses, you have a lot more conflict, a lot more tension regarding the leaders of Commonwealth trying to hold onto their ivory towers, and all of our main characters trying to tear down those towers and say, this is fucked up, this is not any better than what we learned from before. And so you have segments of this season that I really enjoyed. You had Daryl and Rosita going in to be in part of the military and able to be badasses. I really enjoyed that. The most captivating part of the story, strangely for me, was Eugene trying to chase his love. All of the intrigue and the tension and the eventual heartbreak whenever he finds out that the girl that he's been falling in love with for a number of episodes is actually a plant and is not a real person. And then kind of, not really a double-edged sword, but kind of the band-aid that goes on that gigantic wound where he realizes that, oh, actually that lady does exist. It's just somebody that I was not spending the last number of weeks with. And so the little glimmer of hope there with Eugene and Max and that whole relationship really was kind of the heartbeat of this season. And there was some pretty good action-centric stuff going on in, like, say, the back 4 or 5 episodes or so, to where you're full on getting the revolt. You're full on getting our main characters fighting against the Commonwealth and the Commonwealth fighting back, and a lot more machine gun artillery action sequences. And then you got the whole lingering threat of this new variant of walkers that are able to climb and pick up weapons and shit. Like, all of that actually ramped up pretty well in that last little stretch. But where this season falters for me is that, one, yet again, broken record, did not need to be 24 fucking episodes. Then you have kind of the main antagonist of this season being all about politics, which, just my own personal taste, one of the least interesting villains we've had thus far on this show. I mean, when so far in the show we have had the governor in Woodbury, we've had cannibals with Terminus, we have had the Whisperers, we've had the Saviors. When you stack all of them up against the main governor, the governess of the Commonwealth, and her shithead little son, they kind of pale in comparison. Also, as it gets a little bit more action-centric and a little bit more insane by the last stretch of the season, the logic of this show really starts to show how weak it is at times, to where there's just full-on assault rifle gunfights going on, and every single time the bullets just like carve out a picture around our main characters. Throughout this entire season, we should have been losing people. You know, you can start with smaller people, you can maybe have a surprise big death somewhere through the season, but nobody really substantial lost anything throughout this entire season until the very last episode. And even the ones that decided to kind of have the ill fate in that final episode, to me, didn't have that much of a big punch to them. I mean, you had Luke and his girlfriend that had been gone the entire season that just randomly show back up a couple of episodes previous to that, don't get a whole lot of screen time, and then immediately when the final episode airs, they both die, and it's supposed to be this huge emotional moment, and it's not whatsoever. And then, of course, you have Rosita, which does have a bit of emotion in the fact that she's a mother, and that she died saving her child, and being a little bit of a badass in the process. And of course, the heartbreak attached with Eugene, who has always loved her and never been able to fully love her. But she's not what I would call a significant character, but maybe that's just me. But the cherry on top of all of that, why this final season is kind of a joke to even call it the final season, is that it's not the final season. That was not the final episode of The Walking Dead. That was a regular old season finale with about 30 minutes of commercials for new incoming spin-off shows. You have Daryl going off to his own solo adventures, you have Negan and Maggie going off on their old solo adventures in like New York or something, and then they shoehorn the fuck out of this sequence with Rick and Michonne still on the hunt for each other as like a little tease at the very end of the episode for them to go off and have their own fucking show. And so when I'm watching it, it just brought back all of this PTSD, all this anger that I've had about this show for basically every season past season 3 to some degree, where it's just like, guys, you are so fucking greedy and so far up your own ass that you're the most inefficient storytellers on television. Like, you just stretch everything out to an unbearable length for money and for ratings. You would never in your life look at a storyline and say, you know what, this is actually the best point for the story to end it. No, your motivation's always, you know what, we can stretch this shit out for about 8 more years. And so the fact that I bought back into this show and binged 4 seasons worth just to get to the end, and it basically just said, hey, you want to know what happens next? Now you gotta watch 3 shows, bitch. That just infuriated me. Like, anything emotionally satisfying that they accomplished by the end of this season, by the end of that episode, like with Eugene getting married to Max and having the daughter named Rosita, and the Commonwealth community starting to thrive underneath the rule of Ezekiel, and the big motherfucker who was in the orange Power Ranger suit the entire time, can't think of his name. All of that was really cool, and it was like, okay, this is a good spot to end. This is a satisfying narrative end for a lot of these characters. And all the main characters you care about, they're like, nope, see you next time. And possibly the most baffling part about all of that is that they announced all of these spin-off shows months ago. So for months, all of even the most dedicated Walking Dead fans knew none of these fucking characters were having their fates be held up in the air at all. They all knew that all of them are going to live and the story's not going to end because we're going to have to continue to watch in 3 separate fucking shows. And as a final note to end on before we move on with the rest of this ranking and don't have to talk about season 11 anymore, oh my god, Daryl and Carol, will you just fuck already? Coming in at number 7 is going to be season 4. Now, while there's an aspect to this season that I really enjoyed with having just disease and sickness be the overlying threat of most of the season, I thought that was really unique, and they kind of set it up like there's this looming threat coming, and then you find out that it's this invisible killer. That was really interesting to me, and having to wall off certain people within this prison and kind of quarantine others. You get the first hints of Carol becoming much more of a badass to where she just flat out just burns motherfuckers that are sick, and Rick has to exile her just for her to come back and be the ultimate badass in season 5. I actually really liked all of that. Where the season falters is that after that midpoint of the season where the governor randomly shows the fuck back up and you finally get the conclusion of that storyline like 7 episodes later, and then it's just 8 episodes of them walking in the woods towards Terminus that everybody and their mother knew was going to be a bad idea. Especially the way that they decided to execute that governor storyline just felt odd to me. Like, it's just an extra 2 episodes that could have just been tacked on to the end of season 3 and made season 3 feel like an actual complete storyline regarding the governor in Woodbury, or they could have cut out some of the shit and just actually followed more of the comic book storyline to where the siege on the prison is actually the end of that storyline. It felt really weird and really just manufactured to start a new season, spend most of the early half of the season going through all these new things just to have that character show back up randomly, fuck shit up, and die. The only thing that has ever been even remotely memorable about the back half of this season is, look at the flowers. Yeah, that shit was fucked up. Coming in at number 6 is going to be season 6. Very decent season of this show. We're still kind of in that meh area for me. There's only a few seasons of this show I'm really positive on, if you haven't figured that out by now. And there was this thing that The Walking Dead started to do from season 4 onward that always felt odd, to where the first half of the season is always just wrap up stuff for the previous season, and the second half of the season is always setting up something else that carries over to the next season. It just feels very odd as a breaking point, to where it almost feels like they need to reshuffle, like have the last half of season 4 and the first half of season 5 be its own season, and the same thing with 5 and 6 and onward. It goes all the way through basically until season 11 that feels like its own story. And season 6 is possibly the one that gets hurt the most by that, because the first half of season 6 is all wrap-up stuff for the Alexandria storyline that we had in the end of season 5, and the back half of this season is all just setup for the Saviors and the All Out War storyline. And so as a whole season, as a narrative for the whole season, it feels very jumbled because it's all just wrapping up and setting up things. There's not like this major season-long arc that we're following that you can look back on season 6 and say, oh, that's that season with the blank happening. You get the introduction of Jesus and the hilltop, and now there's this other community that's similar to Alexandria that we got to worry about, and it's all about rebuilding and everybody kind of splitting off and doing their own thing. And then you get the whole fucking tease with Glenn dying that was blatantly obvious was a fake out just because of the way that they handled it. It's like, that's a very significant character. You're not going to handle it that way. Just for them like 5-6 episodes later to say, hey, surprise everybody, Glenn's not dead. Yeah, no shit. And they decide to get into the good graces of Hilltop by taking out the Saviors. You know, Hilltop's like, hey, there's these fucking dudes with machine guns that are always strong-arming us and taking half our shit, and Rick and all of them are like, well, we're bad motherfuckers, so we'll just take them out in 5 seconds. And they kill everybody in this little depot, and it turns out out, that's about this many of the saviors. And that's the most effective segment of this season, is from that point forward, that looming threat, knowing, especially those of us that have some of the knowledge of the comic books, what is coming and who is coming, more importantly. But then they leave it off with, bar none, the most infuriating season finale I have ever watched in my life. And the season 6 finale brought me to my lowest point of enjoyment of the show that I have ever been on in 6 years. When that episode cut to black, I was walking around my living room like this.
Fuck! Fuck! Fuck, motherfucker! Motherfucker! You know how fucking stupid you fucking are! No!
It was about a year before I even started YouTube, around that. And I was so mad and so passionate about the way that they decided to end this season with a giant dick tease that I actually went on Facebook and had like a little Facebook Live video where I basically did what I'm doing now in the most primitive, garbage-looking sense possible and just ranted on my thoughts on the season 6 finale and posted it for all my Facebook friends. So, in a way, the season 6 finale was kind of like the precursor of motivating me and kicking me in the ass and getting me back on YouTube, and now here we are. Thank you, season 6. Maybe I'm a little hard on you. But the season 6 finale just encompassed my overall thoughts on where The Walking Dead had gone from season 3 onward, to where it was all about just blackmailing you to come back. There was never a point in that last few stretches of seasons to that point where it felt like we ended the season on this satisfying note. We wrapped up the season-long storyline and teased things to come that we're eventually going to introduce when the series comes back. They never felt that way with their season finales. It always just felt like, and fuck you, you don't get to find out, come back. Coming in at number 5 is going to be season 3, the Prison and Woodbury season. And this was the first season of the show to go to a 16 episode length. Previous to that, we had, I think, a 5 or 6 episode season in season 1, and then a 13 episode season in season 2. So we got even more extended, which those of us that knew the storyline of the Prison and of Woodbury went, oh, well, of course, you got 16 episodes worth of shit you can fill this out with, right? On a positive note, you get the introduction of Michonne, one of the most badass characters in the show. The prison setting is awesome. They introduced the whole concept of chopping off limbs after a bite to try to save the person, which is pretty gnarly. The introduction of the governor, of course, which is one of the more memorable villains, certainly in the comic books, not as much in the show, but there was potential there. The return of Merle and the whole dynamic that brings with Daryl. The whole city of Woodbury was the first time we got introduced to this functioning society post-apocalypse, so there was a lot of really big things introduced in this season. But unfortunately, this was the beginning of the rest of the track record of the show, in my own opinion, to where they start to really pad things out with filler. First half of the season is all things going on in this prison, and Andrea and Michonne going through the woods, eventually getting introduced to Woodbury and the governor, and Andrea shacking up with the governor, and Andrea just in general is one of the most infuriating and worst handled characters in this entire series, to the point where when they end the season with her fate being kind of dangled, like, is she gonna make it? Everybody was like, fuck her, let her get bit. And then it's eventually Michonne who sees through what the governor is and what Woodbury is, and kills the zombie daughter and takes the eyeball of the governor and turns him into this intense psychopath. And her linking up with Rick and all them then makes the back half of the season of Rick and company versus the governor. And I think a lot of that honestly just has to do with the fact that if you read the comic books, that storyline is so much better, so much more darker and intense in the comics, that it just felt watered down when you got to see the live action version of it. But it's also the fact that they don't wrap it up. I mean, they build up all season long for 16 episodes, this ultimate confrontation at the prison. And when you finally get there, you get a half measure because they want to continue that story on like episode 5 or 6 of season 4. And so it was the first season of the show up to that point that I felt kind of let down by. You know, I'm somebody that, as you have seen, it hasn't been on this list so far, I'm actually a pretty big defender of season 2, which isn't a big fan favorite, but there was 2 seasons of this show that I absolutely loved. Season 3 was the first time where it felt like, you guys are starting to slip a little bit, and it was also the first season that wasn't ran by Frank Darabont. Coincidence? I think not. Coming in at number 4 is going to be season 9. Now, to be honest with you, I was actually very pleasantly surprised at this season because I had just started getting back into the show a couple weeks ago, suffered through season 8, which I already knew was going to be painful because pretty much everybody said that that was arguably the worst season, or at least the right before the worst, which was season 7. And so when season 9 started, this is where all of the promise started to come in of all the people that have been telling me for years, the show gets better. The show gets back to its glory days. And the only real negative thing I can tell you about this season is that it just feels structurally a little weird because you get like 5 episodes, 6 episodes or so of Rick, after a little time jump, trying to rebuild things after the all-out war and trying to rebuild this bridge and get the saviors to work with everybody. And there's some, turmoil with that. And then he just pieces the fuck out of the show. And then you get this major time jump. And then the actual storyline of season 9 starts, which is all of these surviving members of our main characters that are a little bit older, a little bit different, a little bit wiser, going up against the Whisperers. And I genuinely thought the Whisperers probably are the best villains we've ever had on this show. There was something really dark and creepy and archaic about like their motivations and how they're like, we are the apocalypse. And it was something really creepy when they first got introduced, to where Jesus and them are in this dark cemetery that has fog, and you can hear the whispers, like the dead are talking. What the fuck's going on? Are they evolving? And then that scene whenever Jesus is just taking dudes out and goes to kill that last walker, and that walker jukes his ass and stabs him. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? And yeah, I had not read up to that point in the comics, so I did not know who the Whisperers were. And once Lydia kind of gets kidnapped and joins the main group, and you get Alpha and the rest of the Whisperers that just kind of show up full on the gate, and you start to see what threat these people actually are and how psychotic Alpha actually is. The rest of the season I actually thought was pretty damn good and pretty intense, especially that whole Red Wedding thing, where you get all like 9 or so characters. About 5 of them are worthless and 3 of them are actually pretty significant, where their heads are just on these pikes. That was one of the craziest moments of the entire series, where it was like, oh shit, they are not fucking around. But then they don't resolve that storyline. You get one other episode of the season that really just feels like falling action at that point. Like, why they did not end the season at the heads on the pikes is beyond me. That would have been the craziest season finale of this entire show. That would have actually put a really nice narrative closing for that season about, you underestimated the fuck out of these people and now you are in for some shit. And waiting to see how other characters are going to react, especially Carol, to the last head that's on the pike. But you didn't get that. You get one other episode where things just continue to happen, and then the season just ends. And so really it's just the structure of this season that holds it back for me. That weird little 6-episode Rick, leaving the show adventure, and then that one extra episode at the end, and the existence of season 10. Like, if you had taken episode 7 or whatever onward and just bookended it with the first half of season 10 and made one crazy ass season of the Whisperers and do the mid-season finale at the heads on pikes, that probably would have been the best season of this entire series. But they didn't decide to do that because reasons. And something I didn't mention in season 10 and season 11 that certainly is a factor that starts in season 9 is that with the absence of Rick, with the absence of Michonne, with the absence of Maggie, who eventually does come back to the show, I did feel like the characters that we were left with was not as interesting of a group. Carol is always great. Of course, Daryl's a badass, even though he's a very one-note character in my opinion. Ezekiel gets much more interesting throughout the last couple of seasons. Everybody else, with the exception of Eugene. Eugene's just kind of quirky, I like him. Everybody else, I can kind of take or leave them. You don't really have those dynamic characters like Rick and Michonne and Maggie when you take them away and don't replace them with somebody, or at least upgrade the other characters to be as interesting as them. Coming in at number 3 for me is going to be season 5. Now this to me is the best season after the 16 episode stretch. Obviously, by process of elimination, that's true, but season 5 to me, even though it still kind of suffers from that weird structure to where the first part of the season is kind of wrapping up the last season and the second half of the season is setting up the next season, that still bugs me. But season 5 has the best version of that, to where you immediately start with all the characters locked up in Terminus. The first episode, they're all about to be slaughtered for meat, and you get the first showing of Ultimate Badass Carol, where she comes in like fucking Rambo in First Blood and just freeze all of them with this explosion and doing like some serious like Rincon shit that was really cool. and then the group kind of running away from Terminus and eventually slaughtering Terminus in a badass way was really cool. The introduction of Father Gabriel, a character that I did not like at all at first, but turns into one of the more badass characters in this entire show. The revelation that Eugene is completely full of shit and has been letting these characters just believe that he's significant when he's not. He's a coward that just wants people to protect him. Pretty awesome little reveal there. Again, had not made it that far in the comics, so that was kind of surprising. And the back half of this season introducing Alexandria and this functioning society to where they actually recruit all of our main characters. And they want Rick to be the constable, and they want Michonne to be his deputy, and they want the other characters to come in. And for the first time in the show, our main characters are actually kind of the psychos of the world, to where everybody else is functioning normal people that want to carry on with life. And Rick and everybody else are so fucked up from all their experiences from up to this point that they're the evil ones. You got Rick that's like psycho looking at this chick that he wants to fuck, and he's trying to plan how to kill her husband. You have Carol that's like coming in and trying to play like she's this innocent little mom making cookies, and then opens the latch in the armory and starts to get weapons to all of her friends in case they need to use them. Of course, Morgan finally gets introduced back in, and he's got like this no-kill rule, which was a really interesting little filler episode, one of the more interesting filler episodes. It was just a really entertaining story there, to where I felt like even though they still suffer from some of the issues of this post-3 Walking Dead world that we've been living in, it was the best functioning version of that. Oh, yeah, that whole episode with like the cops in the hospital where Maggie's sister dies, that was fucking stupid. Yeah, we gotta throw that in there. Coming in at number 2 is going to be season 2 of The Walking Dead. And I have never understood the hate hailed at this season, especially in comparison to a lot of the seasons that come after it. If you want to tell me it's not nearly as good as the show started, I'm gonna agree with you. But if you tell me that this is a garbage season or it's one of the worst seasons, I have no idea what show you're watching, because I have always thought this was a very solid season. Still has some filler. This is the first time that they expanded the season out. It was twice as long as season 1. And so you still get a few episodes here and there, namely in the first half of the season, that do feel like they're meandering a bit. The whole episode about trying to pull the bloated walker out of the well as if anybody's gonna drink that fucking water ever again. That shit was dumb. But the whole search for Sophia, paired with the introduction of Herschel's farm and the characters that come along with that, Carl getting shot, I thought that was all pretty captivating stuff, especially the way that it all ended up in the mid-season finale with Shane breaking open the barn and revealing that all the walkers were in there and them just killing all of them despite what Herschel thinks that they're still alive and just need some help. And the ultimate reveal that Sophia has been in the barn and been a walker this entire time. Pretty heartbreaking stuff. Certainly for the early section of the show was the most heartbreaking thing up to that point. But the biggest thing that I always love about this season, that it will always make it one of my favorites, is Shane. The storyline regarding him just full on going evil and trying to plot against Rick, eventually trying to kill Rick. All the revelations that come to Rick about all of that, with his wife revealing that she was sleeping with Shane, revealing that she's pregnant, revealing that it might be Shane's baby, and all the stuff that goes along with that little love triangle I thought was just really intense. I mean, this is the show that gave us the John Bernthal that we know and love, and he's just one of the best actors working today, and I thought he was awesome in season 1. Season 2 is where he really just got to kind of come into his own, and he's always been one of my favorite characters of the show. Even though he's a scumbag, even though he's a bad guy, there's aspects to him that I actually think is sympathetic and is understanding, and it makes a lot of sense as far as how somebody's mental space would be after everything that he's gone through. So I have always liked season 2. I've always thought that it was one of the best executed storylines, best executed seasons of this entire show. But number 1 is still the first season of The Walking Dead. Now, it's the shortest by a landslide. It's only 6 episodes long, but to me, it's always been the most efficient at its storytelling. There's not a season past this that feels like it has filled out its entire runtime with all captivating stuff. And so the introduction of Rick Grimes, the rules of this universe where he goes into a coma, wakes up post-apocalypse, gets taught the rules by Morgan, a character that we are all fascinated by, don't see again until seasons later. The introduction of Shane and his wife and the group and how his family has been after the apocalypse, and the whole love triangle beginnings, the rules about covering yourself with guts, the introduction of Daryl and Merle. I mean, this just, all the introductory stuff of this season keeps it to where every episode is captivating for one reason or another. Even the way that they end it in the CDC, the first glimmer of hope that they get just completely crushed, like literally blows up in their face, and sets you up for a show that had all of the promise in the world, all of the potential in the world, but because of changing showrunners, because of studio politics, because of greed, in my own opinion, never felt like it met the potential or the promise that that first season set up so well. Still a show that I would recommend to certain people, still a show that I certainly don't regret the fact that I went back and actually finished it. Now I can be part of the conversation finally, and there is good stuff all the way throughout this entire series, from season 1 all the way through to season 11, but it just feels like a show where all of the highest quality was in the beginning of the series, and the farther it went along, the more problems that came along, or the bigger those problems became. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed this, please click over here for my Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul ranking, and I'm also gonna put my top TV shows up here for you to check out as well. Please like and share this video and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to.